Started, and welcome to everyone. My name is Dr. Wendy Ferrone, and I am your facilitator for this session, joined by my colleague, Amy Cavalier. We are very excited to have with us two experts in the field of literacy, Dr. Pam Kastner and Eighmy. They will be offering today the presentation on building a large sight word vocabulary, that it's not magic, it's informed instruction. Before we turn this over to our presenters, I'd like to cover just a couple housekeeping bits. This session will be recorded. It's 75 minutes long. The handouts for this session are at the Patent Literacy Symposium are housed on Schoology. The session handouts are in the folder that is titled the same as this presentation in the time slot that has been allotted. The chat feature will be turned off between participants, but you will be able to chat with Amy and myself if you have any needs. Please keep your video feature off and mute yourself during the presentation just to avoid any distraction. We would love for you to tweet out or share on social media all this fantastic learning that we are experiencing this virtual literacy symposium. The hashtag for the Patent Literacy Symposium is hashtag PA Lit Symposium 2020. And now I'd like to read a little bit about our very special presenters today. Dr. Pam Kastner is an educational consultant and a dear colleague of mine at the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network in Harrisburg, where she serves as the state lead consultant for literacy. Pam currently co-leads Pennsylvania's dyslexia screening and early literacy intervention pilot program extension and expansion for Patent. In addition, she's part of the research team investigating the impact of explicit instruction and advanced phonemic awareness on student literacy outcomes. She serves on the statewide multi-tiered systems of supports MTSS team, working extensively in the area of literacy, effective instruction, formative assessment, and professional learning communities. She has served in a number of leadership capacities at the district level and served as a Pennsylvania Distinguished Educator for the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Pam is certified language essentials of teachers of reading and spelling. What a perfect follow-up to our keynote, Dr. Louisa Motes. She's a letters trainer and a certified reading specialist. Another fantastic colleague of mine is Eimy, who provides professional development and consultation for school districts, implementing multi-tiered systems of support through her position as training and consultant literacy consultation person at the Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit Number 5. She is certified in elementary education and holds a master's degree in special education. She's a certified letters trainer and facilitator, training teachers both locally and through Voyager Sopris Learning, and an Acadians reading mentor. She has expert knowledge in the Orton-Gillingham approach and structured literacy. She provided technical assistance to Mill Creek Township School District in Pennsylvania Dyslexia Pilot, providing professional development, coaching, and district-level guidance as well, and has served as IU support for teams awarded Patent Series grants in dyslexia expansion and in RTI for specific learning disability determination. Ms. Eimy is a co-founding board member of the Reading League Pennsylvania branch. She has a passion for working alongside teachers to ensure that they have access to the science of reading and feel competent and confident in implementing in their classrooms. She resides in Erie, Pennsylvania. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Pam and Erin, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy. We appreciate that. Those were long bios. I even missed the president of the Reading League in there. Thank you very much. So today's presentation, Erin is going to have the PowerPoint. So she's in charge of advancing the slides, and we're going to be going back and forth a little bit. And starting us off is going to be Erin. So take it away, Erin.
Well, welcome today. We have an incredible lineup for the symposium, so I'm always flattered when we see the numbers, and thank you for joining us. We're hoping that you have a great hour. So we put this together, this building a large sight word vocabulary. It's not magic, it's informed instruction. And you'll see the QR code. Hopefully you had a chance to scan that already. We created a Wakelet for you, which is just an online repository of information, videos, and resources that you can utilize to keep investigating beyond our presentation today. If you don't have a QR code scanner or a smartphone or device, you can just copy down bit.ly/lit-simp sight words, and that will get you to the Wakelet, and we'll drop that in the chat as well. So welcome today, and we'll get started. You already know a little bit about us, and I just want to give a quick shout out to my colleague, Megan Howard, if she's on with us today. Megan and I developed this presentation to share with our IU5 LEAs. So thanks, Megan, and Dr. Pam Kastner said she would hop on and help me present this, and we're so excited to bring you the content for today. So again, this is what you will see if you're able to scan the QR code. You should see a Wakelet that looks like this with sight words, and all the resources will be there. And we'll put this up at the end of the presentation as well. So our relationship, right, to Patton from the IU sometimes is a little mysterious for new teachers or teachers that are dug into the work. And when I was in a school district, I had no idea what the IU was. So the structure is the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Bureau of Special Education. Patton has 3 sites. And Pam, if you want to hop in, you can.
Okay.
But Pam is located in Harrisburg, and we have a Pittsburgh regional site, as well as now, it's not King of Prussia anymore, is it?
Malvern. Yeah, it's Malvern now. That's okay.
So
They're close.
your IUs are available to you to do support, and we want you to make sure that you know your IU TAC really well, because we support school districts, administrators, and teachers. And in our training and technical assistance capacities at Patton and the IU, our services are free through IDEA, or as Jack Fletcher called, IDEA. So just some housekeeping. I think Wendy mentioned that the chat is off, but please, if you have questions, type those to the hosts. We are going to be incorporating a couple of nonverbal signals. So at the bottom, if you've never used Zoom toolbar before, click on participants, and your floating toolbar for Zoom should be at the bottom, and you should see 2 people heads. Just click on that and you'll get a pop-up window. And we're going to ask you to respond yes or no. So go ahead and just give us a feel for if you can find that. So click on participants and see if you can click yes or no. I'm not seeing it on mine. Okay, so Julie, as you can see, her hand went up there. Okay, so it looks like you can raise your hand, but maybe you can't do yes or no. That's okay. Okay.
You can always have them
Um,
raise your hand for a yes and keep it down for a no, I guess.
Okay, so we have a little thing there. So our learning intentions, thank you for those of you who found your participant toolbar. We're going to review our learning intentions, and Pam's going to go over those for us.
No. Okay, so our learning intentions for today, first of all, is to define the term sight words, because I know for myself as well early on, and when I visit schools, oftentimes when I say the word sight words, there's a vast variety of definitions or how people feel that term is implemented. So we're going to clarify that for everybody. We're going to talk about orthographic mapping. That is the buzzword and has been ever since Dave Kilpatrick's Essentials books in 2015 and Linnea Aries' work. We're going to talk about dolch words and fry words and clarify some terms around high frequency words. And then we're going to talk about best practices so that we can help kids build a large sight word vocabulary so that they instantly and automatically know many, many words. And then we're going to support you with an instructional routine for teaching all words, but in particular words that might have an irregular part. There you go, Aaron, you can switch. Okay, so at Patton, we always, and Aaron as well, or we ground everything in the theoretical frameworks that underpin the science of reading. This is a very brief presentation, so we won't have a lot of time to go into these, but we always begin here. On the left-hand side, they're kind of this way, you see the simple view of reading. It's from Goff and Tunmer from 1986. And the premise for Goff and Tunmer, which has been supported in seminal research for many decades now, is that there are two large domains that support reading comprehension, and it's word recognition. Can students accurately and automatically read the words on the page? And once they read them, language comprehension, do they know what those words mean? Is it in their oral language? They cannot understand a word in print that they don't have in their listening or language comprehension. And you'll notice there's a multiplication there because it's the product, reading comprehension is the product of these two big domains, word recognition and language comprehension. We need both to be a skilled reader. In and of themselves, each one is insufficient, but together they do result in reading comprehension for students. So that's a very quick version of the simple view of reading, but we wanted to start there with you. Now, our symposium is completely grounded in Scarborough's reading rope. Whenever you received information, or if you look on the Patton website, you'll see Scarborough's reading rope aligned with the symposium. What Scarborough did is she amplified the indicators under each of these big ideas. So under word recognition, you'll see that we have phonological awareness, decoding, and then that sight recognition that we're going to talk about today. And you'll see that they are braided together. For a student to be a skilled reader, all of these skills must be very facile. So if any of these ropes, per se, if you look at them that way, is frayed or is weak in some manner, students will have difficulty with reading words. And Dr. Fletcher talked a bit about that yesterday, about word reading disabilities. So when a student has challenges reading words, we look to these areas to inform us and to support our instruction and our intervention. That was pretty. At the top, of course, we see language comprehension. We see background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Those are, again, woven together, and both word recognition and language comprehension are woven together for skilled reading. We also want to talk a tiny bit about Linnea Airy, of course. You see how the phases of word reading, there are 4 phases of word reading. The early alphabetic phase, the pre-alphabetic phase, where students are reading things almost as logographic pictures. That means when they go by McDonald's, as my son did when he was 2, he would point to the McDonald's sign and say, McDonald's. But I wasn't under the impression that he had sounded that out, that he knew how the alphabet was matching to the phonemes there. So they're just looking at words almost as pictures. But when we think about sight word recognition and building a large sight word vocabulary, we're really thinking about the early alphabetic phase and the later alphabetic phase, Linnea's Airy's phases. This is when students are becoming facile with letter sound correspondences. And we see this in their reading, but also in their spelling. As we saw in the chart with Dr. Motes this morning, and she was showing how students' spelling progresses through these phases, students become more and more accurate with the orthographic patterns that match to those phonemes. So this is where we're going to be spending some of our time. When you think about sight word recognition, we're really in the early alphabetic to the later alphabetic phase. And this is really a critical point. Of course, when they're in the consolidated phase, they are accurate and automatic at reading and becoming progressively skilled at spelling and knowing those orthographic patterns. So we just wanted to anchor you there first, as we do with all our trainings. If these theoretical frameworks are new to you, we really encourage you to explore them more. But I'm sure there's many on here who could go in deeply as well. We just wanted to start there and give you a brief overview. All right, Erin.
Okay, so again, we're going to just anchor a little bit into some of these bigger ideas. Structured literacy is another one of those ideas. And so what is structured literacy? We wanted to share with you, and we have posted in the Wakelet this infographic by Carolyn Cohen. She designed this for the International Dyslexia Association. And structured literacy is really an umbrella term chosen by the IDA to unify and encompass evidence-based programs and approaches that are effective for students identified with specific learning disability in reading or dyslexia. And in addition to the teaching those decoding skills that mostly are prominent when people think about structured literacy or in Gillingham or multisensory instruction, we are advocating for through structured literacy that we're not only just teaching decoding, right? That we're teaching all the components of instruction. So the elements are in the inside of the circle. These are the what of instruction. They're interdependent. They work together, and they must all be taught explicitly and systematically to benefit all kids. So all students benefit from this, and we have some structured literacy sessions going on, I think, concurrently, so you'll want to watch those later as they're recorded. Um, and outside of the elements, we also have the principles or the how. So we're looking for systematic and cumulative, explicit instruction, Anita Archer's main tag, right? And diagnostic. So we want to be sure that we're assessing and we're using that assessment to drive instruction. So that is a very fast sort of orientation to structured literacy. So all of our work also should revolve around a basic phonics scope and sequence. And every comprehensive core program has something a little bit different, but if you don't have something that you're relying on, we wanted to show you an example. So this is from the Barksdale Reading Institute and Reading Universe. You can see that a simple view of reading is right at the top there. It's also grounding this scope and sequence. And the rope components are used as column headers with also adding writing and decoding running through, encoding, sorry, spelling running throughout, exactly what Louisa was speaking to this morning. So if you don't have something that is governing your instruction, you need to start with a scope and sequence. So for example, if you're looking at phonics, we would start with most simplistic and work to more advanced. So in order for students to be able to read multisyllable words, they need to know the alphabetic principle. They need to understand that that letters or squiggles or graphemes or sequences represent phonemes in English. And so that's just an example of how we are going to frame today's work. So within that structured literacy approach to teaching reading, we also need to have a lesson plan sequence. And it's an assumption that if you are teaching in a structured literacy environment, phonics will be taught explicitly through a consistent lesson format. Skills will be introduced systematically through a scope and sequence and taught directly and explicitly. So this is something that your daily lesson should look like. The elements should be developing phonemic awareness. Start with that speech component. Introducing sounds and spellings. How do those things hook up together? There should be sufficient practice with blending and reading words and building automatic word recognition. And then applying those skills to decodable text, especially with this population of students that we're looking for, learning those basic skills from early to later alphabetic. So we're also including, right, spelling and dictation, plus teaching those irregularly spelled words in a very explicit way. So this is just a reflection. Are your lessons designed according to structured literacy principles? And if Pam and I had you in a big room with circle tables, we would have you be doing a turn and talk and a share out. And so that is honestly the part that we miss about training. But please just kind of reflect on that and take this back, hopefully to your PLCs and have a conversation about this. So program components should be apparent. When you're looking at your materials or your curriculum components, you should notice things like recurring distributed practice. You should have decodable text or readers that are given to you as component pieces. So this is CKLA, and we just put this in here because this is free to access, and the decodable student readers have been carefully constructed to provide students with recurring distributed practice, and that's oftentimes what we see is missing is that amount of sheer practice that students need to apply the skills that we're teaching. So we're talking today about building sight words, and CKLA calls the irregularly spelled words tricky words, and you can see that they're interspersed throughout their scope and sequence. Their readers have some indications in the text. The new tricky words are underlined, the word you, Y-O-U, as well as the regular patterns that have been taught are highlighted in bold. So students pay attention, and you could even read those words in isolation first and then read the text. So these are just some examples that we wanted to set the stage with.
Okay, so as Erin said, we do miss seeing people face to face, but what we'd like you to do just maybe for the next 30 seconds, and we'll ask Wendy and Amy to maybe share what you see in the chat or the question box. But we'd like you to describe write a quick write about how you would describe sight words to parents. What would that look like? So I'll give you about 30 seconds. Maybe a few of you can post some things in the chat that Wendy can share out with us. I'll put my timer on.
Okay, I'm seeing things like sight words are irregular words that can't be decoded, words that commonly occur in text that students should automatically know, words that don't follow traditional spelling patterns, words you recognize instantly, words that don't sound out in a regular way, words that students need to automatically know. A sight word is a word that is immediately recognized on sight.
Those are some good definitions.
They are.
Talking about some of them during this session, so thank you for that. We always like to share ways too that you can take this back. So this might be something if you're a coach or a teacher or in any position to kind of collaborate with others, you might use these questions to kind of guide the same thing. And the most important thing that we typically find as you were sharing those, Wendy, is that there was no one definition. We didn't hear the same responses from everybody. So it's a great way to clarify common language. We need to start with common language in schools because if we don't have common language, it makes it very difficult. So those are some questions that you could use to support that. So when we do a Google search for sight words for images, this is what we see. We also see a lot of variation here, right? So I especially like the one on the top left. Do they go in the dog? It looks like those words go in the dog house. We're going to talk a bit about, right next to that is this, these different fonts that kids are looking at with the words. And also at the very top, what Aaron was just scrolling over is, I think it's Lynn Stone coined this term called word coffins. Where we put kids in these, we put letters in these little boxes or little coffins, and kids are expected to learn to read words by the shape, the global shape. And we're going to be looking at a video from Stanislaus Dehaene in a bit about that. You know, we hear red words, trick words, put them on flashcards. And so today's session is really to help clarify how we teach words, all words, including these words that are sometimes called trick words, red words, flash words, what have you. Thanks, Erin. So the first thing, you know, as I said, it's really important to have a common language, and we're going to look to 5 from 5. It's a great site from Australia. I really encourage you to visit it if you have not already. They have a really nice resource that helps us define these terms that you see on your slide. So we'll just go. So high frequency words, this is funny, I've watched Dave Kilpatrick, and he's presenting today, speak many times about high frequency words. And he said, well, high frequency words are high frequency words. They're words that you see a lot. And they're words that kids often will see in early readers. And oftentimes, you know, I've been in many schools. One school that I worked with a number of years ago had 100 high frequency words that kids were asked to memorize on flashcards because they were the 100 most frequent words. And when we really looked at those words, of course, they were many of them were very phonetically regular, and kids could be using, you know, phonics, their letter sound correspondences to decode them. And so oftentimes, just because they're high frequency words, they are given to kids as whole words, and students are not asked to analyze the phonemic and orthographic features of those words. And so we're going to talk about the impact that has to students' brains. Also, oftentimes we have a word that may have one irregular part, or I think of Louisa Moat, she says it's unexpected. It's not necessarily irregular, it's unexpected. And it's unexpected, as Erin said, in the sequence, the phonics sequence that kids are engaged in. So it's temporarily unexpected because students have not learned that phonics pattern yet. It's typically, not always, but it's typically the vowel. So when we think about irregular words or words that have an unexpected part, we have this words that are temporary irregular. That means students have not learned the phonics pattern yet. It might be permanently irregular, so it has a lot of unexpected spellings, or wholly decodable, like the word them up in the high frequency word. That is wholly decodable, and yet many kids are given this word on a flashcard to memorize as a whole unit, as if it's a paired associate learning, which we know learning to read is not. And then this whole training is about helping students build a large sight word vocabulary. And so how do we support kids in instantly and automatically seeing a word and being able to read that without putting any thinking to it? It's instantly and automatically available. And that's really orthographic mapping. So we'll be talking about that a bit more, but I would encourage you to visit 5 from 5. Okay, so here is the yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. So Erin, we'll have to see how we move forward.
Okay. So since we don't actually have the yes, no button, that's okay. We're going to try to do raise your hand. So in your participant bar, you should be able to raise your hand and we'll be able to get a count from that. So I'm just going to lower everyone's hand. And if you have a question, please chat that to our moderators so they can let us know about that. So I'm just going to lower everyone's hand for right now. And what I'm going to do is we're going to show you some statements, and we are going to kind of go back and forth. So it's a little tradition and myth. So Mythbusters here. So we're going to start with this statement. Reading is a visual process. If you agree with that, put your hands up. And again, we're not going to scroll through the names to see who did that. We're just going to get a total count. Okay, so I think I should get an alert for how many people have their hands up, maybe. Okay, so we have 100. Let's see, how many people do we have on right now? We have 284 people on. We have 81 people that have their hand raised. Oh, some people are putting their hand down. Okay, so we're going to reveal these. So this is actually a myth. Reading is not a visual process. Reading is a linguistic process. You do use your eyes, of course, and if you were in the keynote yesterday with Dr. Fletcher, he spoke to this a little bit, and I was like, yay, we're going to talk about this in our session. But you use your eyes to discern the differences between the features of letters and graphemes, but we don't see words as objects. Like our brain recognizes a tree, and you learn to call it a tree, right? It's not, like Pam said, paired associate learning. Here's this thing, call it this, okay? So a little bit of really important refinement there. So I'm going to lower everyone's hand, I think.
I'll take the next one, Erin.
Go ahead. Take the next one, Pam.
Okay, good readers analyze each letter and space in text. Is that a raise your hand if that's a yes, or keep it down if you think it's a no? And you can let me know.
So far we have like 37 people with their hand raised, 40, and
that answer is yes. We do analyze every single letter and its sequence. It's just that as adults, we're doing that in about 250 milliseconds. We're doing it so fast that we do no longer recognize that we're doing it. As we'll hear Dr. Stanislaus Dehaan say, we have forgotten how, that we had to phonically decode each and every word and in the sequence. We know we do this because if we didn't, we would read inhabit as inhibit or horse as house. We are paying attention to the sequence of letters and the orthographic patterns and the phonemes in that sequence as well. But we're just doing it rapidly. Erin, you can take the next.
Okay, so English is crazy. If you agree with that, raise your hands. Okay, so far we have 70 people, 78 people, and it keeps ticking up. So we're just gonna say no, that is false. So we know that only about 4% of words in English are true oddities. And Luisa's new book, Speech to Print, which is on my shelf up there, I should have had it here so I could hold it for you. But she goes into very detailed analysis of all of these words. And her lenses are patterns of letter strings, which she's talked about in our keynote, position of spelling, language of origin comes into play to explain the spellings, etymology, historical context. And so in the Wakelet, we actually have her article, her brand new article. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please read it outside or enjoy it in the sunshine. But what we want to try to convey to students is that English is not crazy, and we want to carefully construct their understanding of English orthography.
All right, I'll take the next one. Good readers memorize whole words.
Okay, I'm going to lower all the hands and then you can raise your hand again. There you go. Okay, so
We kind of
so
gave,
far we only have 24.
oh, good. We kind of gave you a little teaser on that one at number 2. Good readers do not memorize whole words. They are paying attention to every single grapheme and phoneme in the sequence. And they are tracking it. We know that from functional MRIs, watching how folks read in a functional MRI, but also from research studies and eye tracking movement studies. So they are not memorizing whole words. They are absolutely tracking every letter and letter sequence. You can have the last one, Erin.
Okay, so the last one is irregularly spelled words need to be memorized as whole units. Okay, so I'm going to see how, okay, so far we only have 6, 7, just a handful of people. So that is no. And I think that's what we mostly all have been taught, right? And how to teach these words. And so we're going to talk about David Kilpatrick's, he has a quote that we used in here, but irregularly spelled words need to be analyzed even more thoroughly than regularly spelled words. And so we're going to walk you through some ways to do that. So thanks for playing along with us and being flexible. But there are some myths that are busted, okay? So those are prevalent conceptions that we as teachers have been trained to think. And science has taught us differently. And so we're going to go into those components. So if we're looking at heart words, flash words, sight words, trick words, what do we want to call them? I think it would behoove us as a global community to come up with some terms that we could all use. But here are some big questions. We're going to show you this video from Really Great Reading. It's very well done, and the animation is entertaining. And so it's also free that you could share it with your faculty, your staff, your colleagues, and parents. And so here are some things we'd like you to consider while you're watching this video. How quickly do you read words that are familiar? And how do you get a word anchored that Louisa says was stored deeply, right? It's deep down in your lexicon. How do you get it stored in your sight word memory? And why is rote memorization not recommended? Okay, so let's see. I think the Vimeo won't embed, so hold on one second. I'm hoping this will be flawless here, and we'll get this started. Okay, here we go.
Take a look at this familiar word. How long did it take you to read it? You probably read it immediately, effortlessly. Researchers estimate that when a word is familiar to you, you read it in less than 1/20th of a second. Words that we read effortlessly are called sight words.
Sight words can be high-frequency words like these. Sight words can also be low-frequency words like these. If you read these words effortlessly, they are sight words for you.
The collection of words you can read without conscious effort is called your sight word memory. Literate adults have a sight word memory of between 30,000 and 70,000 words.
Everyone's sight word memory is a little different. A first grader's sight word memory often includes words like this. A doctor's sight word memory often includes words like this.
The evidence is very clear that the way to get a word anchored into our sight word memory is through decoding. Once we decode a word successfully several times, it sticks in our brain, where we can recognize and retrieve it effortlessly.
High-frequency words are often the first words we strive to anchor into our students' sight word memories. That's because high-frequency words are words that occur most often in print. At Really Great Reading, we call these words heart words. Heart words are the first words students should learn by heart. These words need to become sight words for our students because they appear in text so frequently, and automatic retrieval of these words plays a big part in reading fluently.
Commonly, educators try to teach high-frequency words through rote memorization. They use flashcards or put them on a word wall, hoping that if students see the words enough times, they will stick.
This isn't much different than what we do in geography when we ask students to look at the shape of a state and then name it. The state with this shape is California. This shape is Florida. Decades of research, however, tell us that rote memorization targets students' visual memory and is not the most effective way to learn to read words. And decades of experience tell us it's a method that's boring for everyone involved.
To store words in our sight word memory, we need automatic letter-sound associations, proficient phonemic awareness, and the ability to connect the sounds in a word to its written form. When we focus solely on rote memorization, we leave out the part that we know works best: connecting sounds to letters.
When high-frequency words don't follow common patterns, it can be tricky connecting sounds to letters. However, even in tricky words, there are lots of parts of the word that make sense. It's not like we look at the word said and say glorp. Most irregularly spelled heart words like from, what, and said have only one irregular letter-sound relationship. This is the secret to helping students remember tricky heart words. It's how to make the tricky sticky.
Really Great Reading's developing a free tool that will help children quickly build tricky heart words into their sight word memories. It's called Heart Word Magic.
Heart Word Magic will leverage students' phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge to make learning high-frequency words fun and effective. To see an example using the word said, click here.
Okay, so if you were watching that, you could see or you heard how fast or how quickly do we recognize words that are familiar. And hopefully you have the answer to that in your mind. We're just going to get this started here again. We just really thought that that was a beautiful presentation of what happens, making the tricky sticky, right? It's a good little catch line. So how do you teach sight words? So now we've defined it, we've talked about what it is a little bit. How do you teach sight words? This would be a part where if we had, 3 hours, we'd put you in a breakout room and you would have a discussion. So we just want you to reflect. What are you doing currently? Maybe what are some colleagues doing right now to teach sight words? So we're going to move to the traditional way that sight words have been taught. And maybe this is what you were trained to do as well. And this is the see and say method. So we're going to take a look at this.
This technique is called see and say sight words. Let me show you how it's done. My turn. Once. Again. Once. What word?
Once.
Yes, I once was a little girl. Your turn.
Once.
Again.
Once.
One more time.
Once.
Good reading that word.
So what's problematic about that method? If you wanted to drop something in the chat or give us some feedback, you can, and Wendy can let us know what you're saying. But that's just a reflection. This is the traditional way that we have considered sight words. When Pam was talking about the deck of 100 flashcards for kindergartners, this is pretty much, I think, what has been done traditionally. And so we're going to talk about where that came from and some understandings that are attached to that. So not all sight words are created equal, right? Which words can be taught using phoneme-grapheme mapping, and what will need to be taught differently because they are irregular. So we're going to look at a quick, sort of flyover view of Dolch and Fry. So we're calling them the Edwards, Edward Dolch and Edward Fry, and
It's
they
weird.
both. Yeah, so they developed word lists, right, based on the most frequently occurring words in the English language. You can see some details here. The Dolch list is made up of about 220 words, and the list does not contain nouns. And so he created another list of 95 words that did have nouns. And somehow, no one actually knows where this came from that we get these lists by grade levels, because Dolch actually didn't do it that way. But I think this is pretty much what we see. We see word walls with colors, and they go right through this list, right? We put up the word the and to and big and blue and jump and away. And we have kids memorize those words first and then move on to others. The Fry list was compiled in 1957 and revised in 1980. So you think about what year it is, right? It's 1920. Or 1920. It's 2020. Oh boy, back in time warp. But Fry's list was an improvement on Dolch's list, but it's just high frequency words. They're both based in secondary sources of what students would encounter when they read, or young children, in text. And so what we're looking at, right, are these lists of words. And, if you're teaching in a scope and sequence, this seems odd to you, right? We have a word like the and of and then we get in. In is wholly decodable, right? So Dolch and Fry were of the time, right, of the look-say approach, or whole language, right? They stated in their publications that phonics could be taught, but advocated that all the words on their list should be learned as sight words or memorized as whole units. So we now have the advantage, right, of current technology and research, like using fMRIs and brain scans and all of those components, right, to know that their ideas were based on theory and not what we know now about how the brain efficiently reads words. So that proficient reader, right, reading brain does not memorize as whole units. So we're looking at the elements of our current instructional practice, and we see these methods, right, these look, say, or memorizing whole words come up in most programs and products that we see. And so this is where the confusion lies about the term.
Okay, so the buzzword, as I said, for many years because of Linnea Airy's work, and recently Dr. David Kilpatrick's book, The Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties, has been orthographic mapping. And that's the process where we store these words for instant and automatic retrieval. But being able to do so rests on two key areas. Of course, it needs to rest on letter sound correspondences and phonemic awareness. Without those, we are not storing them in a way that makes them retrievable instantly. We all know we've had students who can phonically decode a word and then lose it. They are having difficulty orthographically mapping that word so that it's maintained in what Stanislaus Dehaene would call the visual word form area. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and we're going to hear from, yeah, there you go, requires letter sound skills, phonemic awareness. And the big idea with David Kilpatrick's work and Linnea Airy's work is that we need to move beyond phonemic awareness, which is absolutely essential but not sufficient. Students need to be phonemically proficient, and we need to be teaching to those advanced levels so that they are analyzing the phonemic sequences all the way through a word so that they can Dr. Louisa Mose calls those parking spots, so that they can map the associated graphemes to those phonemes. So it becomes bonded both orthographically, phonologically, and then with meaning. So it's a phonological, orthographical, morphological, semantic mapping all at once, and then stored. And for kids who are typical readers, it typically happens in 1 to 4 exposures. But we know for our students who are more at risk, it requires many, many more, and that's very particular to that student. So Lynn Stone is presenting at this symposium. I hope folks go to see
Right
her.
now.
Oh, sugar, that's right.
I
Oh, well, you definitely have to watch her recording. She is a speech language pathologist in Australia, has written a book called Reading for Life. She's absolutely amazing. And she's done a nice little video on orthographic mapping that we wanted to share with you. Also for you to think about how you might use this in your own context or share with someone else. So we'll just watch a couple minutes of this and we'll debrief a tiny bit. There are some questions on the side.
Orthographic mapping. How do children become fluent readers and writers? Well, it starts with a sight word vocabulary. This doesn't mean, though, that they should be given a set of sight words to memorize. That's inefficient and it doesn't help them spell those words later. Instead, they build up a store of words they can recognize effortlessly without sounding them out and without looking elsewhere for cues. In fact, once they have a word in their sight word vocabulary, they can't suppress its sound and possible meanings when they come to that word again. So saying that children shouldn't learn whole words for memorization sounds counterintuitive. And in fact, I have to apologize when I ask teachers not to do this, because many of them spend hours and years even sending home sight words for memorization with the best intentions. But please don't shoot the messenger. A popular thought is that input and output should be equal. So we speak in whole words, why not input whole words? I'm afraid that doesn't work. Let's break it down and put it into perspective. As a literate adult, how many words and word parts do you think you might instantly recognize? Kilpatrick puts it as somewhere between 30 and 70,000. Now my question to you is, did you consciously memorize each one as a whole? Or did you store them in a different way? It would be impossible to consciously memorize this many words. What you actually did was use a process called orthographic mapping. Let's break it down. Ortho means correct or straight, such as in orthodontist or orthopedic. Graph, that which is written. And mapping, matching one representation to another. This diagram is intended to show the relationship between orthography, the spelling of something, M-A-P-P-I-N-G, and how that maps onto phonology, M-A-P-I-N, and then how that's stored in the lexicon, mapping. Here's the process. What you do is you look at the sequence of the letters in a word, then you translate them into possible phonemes when you're reading. You blend those phonemes to form words, and then through exposure those sequences become unitized, leading to instant recognition. Some estimates put it at 1 to 4 exposures for typically developing readers. This in turn facilitates recall when writing. But the big question is, how come some children do learn sight words using flashcards? Well, because it's possible. It's possible to memorize whole words as wholes without sounding them out. But it's not possible to memorize all the words like that. If you want to be efficient and you want to reach as many children as possible, teach them to sound words out. This will help them learn new words, and it will also help them to spell words.
Okay. A nice video from Lynn Stone. So what is the most effective and efficient way for children to learn new words? To orthographically map them. We want students paying attention to the internal structure of words and then analyzing those through their orthography, their phonology, and then mapping that to meaning. That will help them not only read that word that they are looking at, but also other words. We're also going to hear from Dr. Stanislaus Dehaan about this process of whether kids read words by whole units or these word coffins or global shapes, or if they're processing each letter and letter sequence in phonemes. Okay.
This is one of my favorite videos, so please watch the whole thing. It's only about 30 minutes long, and I think I've watched it, I don't know how many times. It's fantastic.
It is.
Another thing that we understand a little bit better now is this very classical question of phonics versus whole word training. You know, there's been a lot of debate in psychology and in education. Should we teach the whole word level, or should we really teach every single letter and their pronunciation? Is there anything such as the global shape of the word which is being used in reading? Well, here there is something very important. As adults, we have forgotten how we were as children. We have forgotten how difficult it was to learn to read, and we think that we can just lay our eyes on a word and it immediately pops to mind. And indeed, there is this notion of parallel reading. We read all of the letters at the same time. This gives us an illusion of whole word reading. But in fact, if we look at the brain still processes every single letter and does not look at the whole shape. So whole word reading is a myth, basically. What we have is letter processing, but letter processing in parallel across all of the letters of the word. The brain does not use the global work shape. And in fact, in children, it's even worse. Children require more and more time for more and more letters. You can see this on this graph. This is the number of letters in a word, the reaction time of the children. And in first grade, they're very, very slow, and they need more and more time for each letter. So this is not at all whole word reading. It's slow, serial, one letter at a time. And as children progress, second grade, third grade, this goes away and gives this illusion of whole word reading. So I think we can be very clear on this point, because there is a strong convergence with educational research to suggest that the brain has nothing to do with this sort of exercises that my child had of picking up the ascender and descender letters and deciding that this corresponds to this word. The global shape is not used.
So as Aaron said, we would really recommend to watch that entire video. It's really a profound video and has a lot of great information to support you. So the big things, other than I love the way he says forgotten. I love how he says that word, but is that whole word reading is a myth, that we do not sequence words through their global shape. We don't read them as whole units. We do look at every letter sequence. So you're seeing a convergence of the evidence for this information, whether through functional MRIs or eye movement studies. So our practices have to align with the science. So we are analyzing the sounds within spoken words and making those connections between graphemes and phonemes. That helps us read other words. So this is what we want to move away from. Oftentimes when we visit classrooms, we do still see the outlines of shapes. Again, we want to move away from that global shape, those word coffins, and we want to move to phoneme-grapheme mapping. We're mapping phonemes to the graphemes, the letter or the letter patterns that map to that sound. So for example, at the bottom of your screen, you see phoneme-grapheme mapping for him. What we would do is we would say to students, my word is him. They would repeat him. Then we would tap out the sounds, and then we would move a chip for each sound and move them down as we made the sound simultaneously. And then touching the first chip, we would say what letter spells this sound. It would be H. The next sound is I. Touch the chip, what letter spells the sound I, and then touch the last chip, what sound and what letter spells the sound. This way we are mapping phoneme to grapheme in a sequence, and we're encouraging students to analyze the word the entire way through. This is very different from putting the word him on a flashcard. We are beginning with speech. I think that Dr. Modes brought that to our attention again this morning with her keynote address, that we begin with speech and move to print. So she was talking about those programs that go print to speech and those that go to speech to print. We want to wire kids' brains in ways that help them be efficient and effective readers, and that is speech to print. Not these global shapes and that we see at the top of the screen, nor these word coffins or slotting them into these different fonts. There's a recent study by Dr. Bruce McCandless that very much clarifies this point. What you see on the screen here are basically brains at the top in the blue, and it's about how we focus students' attention. In this study, students were their attention was focused on either reading whole words or paying attention to the internal structure of words and making that speech to print match, that phoneme-grapheme match. And you can see from the screen that the brain on the right is highlighted more so in the right hemisphere, which is an ineffective and inefficient way to read words. But you'll notice that the brain on the left is highlighted in the left hemisphere, where we want kids to be left lateralized, where they are making these connections between graphemes and phonemes. And the difference here was how teachers were prompting or asking students to pay attention. So how we ask students to focus their attention and how we prompt them when they are reading words and learning words has profound impact on the brain and neural networks that they're building. This is a very, very important study, and I would encourage you to check it out at that link later. There's a quote. Same goes for our the same goes for our decoding prompts. At the bottom, you see it's almost like we said, it's almost like an eat this, not that, but it's a do this, not that. When we know better, we do better. But oftentimes when we are in classrooms, we'll see these kind of beanie baby strategies where students are encouraged to move their eyes away from the print, away from the word. And that's exactly what we do not want them to do. We don't want them to be skipping, frogging. We don't want them to be looking at the first letter and guessing. These prompts are based on a 3 cueing system that has no evidence base. We do want them in the top, you'll see some prompting that has students paying attention to the internal structure of the word. So first point to the word and look closely at all the letters. Sound out the word as I point to the letters and then blend them together. Say the word and then ask, does it make sense? So there's a big difference between beginning with context and meaning and beginning with drawing students' attention to the grapheme phoneme correspondences and asking them to pay attention to the entire word all the way through. Also to the right, you'll see a nice little chart that has similar prompts. So in addition to when students are learning to read words, as they're reading in text, we would encourage you to focus their attention on the word, on the graphemes and the phonemes and all the way through. So the first prompt would be sound it out. Sound it out. Keep your eyes on that word. We don't want students' eyes to be moving away from the print. We oftentimes, as Dave Kilpatrick's books told us, we have compensators who may have great language comprehension. Think back to the simple view of reading and Scarborough's reading rope, and they compensate with context for what they don't know about the phonics or the grapheme phoneme correspondences. As soon as you see a student looking at the first letter in a word and they start guessing at anything that might make sense or a word that starts with that same letter, they are showing you that they are not paying attention to the internal structure of the word, and we need to prompt them back to it.
And I think Mesmer has said that the text that we provide kids, right, encourages either this strategy or this strategy. So if we haven't taught in a scope and sequence and we're not offering students text that they can sound out, then what else is there to look at the picture and guess?
We want them to have repeated practice.
Yep.
So what's the difference between the look-say method, Dolch and Fry, and what the brain research tells us, what the evidence is showing us? We know that Dolch believed in, that memorizing words based on their shape. And we just heard from Dr. Stanislaus Dehaene that whole word reading is a myth. He actually said those words. He often used the word guess. Learning to read is not a psycholinguistic guessing game. It is an opportunity to build phoneme-grapheme correspondences and sequence so that students orthographically map and store words. So good readers analyze all the way through the word and link it to pronunciation and to meaning. Dolch and Fry, let's start out by memorize and then go to phonics. But of course, we know that the research shows that we start with the alphabetic principle, which is mapping letters and sounds, letter-sound correspondences, and starting with those basic phoneme-grapheme mappings, like you saw in the word hymn in these CVCs. So what are some best practices? We do, as Erin said, and we've been saying all along, you need a scope and sequence. So that's the what, but also the how. Direct, explicit, cumulative, lots of feedback for kids and opportunities to respond. All those components of explicit instruction and structured literacy. We do want to draw students' attention to the regular parts. As you saw in the video from the Heart Word Magic, we want to draw their attention to the regular parts of a word that might have an unexpected part. For example, in the word said, the AI is unexpected. We would expect to perhaps see an E there, but we want to draw attention to the internal structure of the word and to those parts that are regular and the part that's unexpected. It also reduces the cognitive load. And Bruce McCandless's research as well, he saw that students did learn to read whole words quickly, but it was very fragile, that they did not maintain them as more and more words were added to this, if you want to call it the flashcard deck, more and more words regressed. They did not, or they're not able to hold on to those. We know 30 to 70,000 words. We certainly have not memorized them. We have orthographically mapped. That's how we know all those words. We did not memorize them. We want lots of opportunities for distributed practice. And as Aaron said, that means decodable text. We want students in text that gives them repeated practice for the phonics patterns they've learned, that encourages them to map their brain and wire their brain in a way that effective readers do, looking through the sequence of the words, and not level text that often has many, many, many spelling patterns and multisyllabic words that require kids to guess or look at pictures. Then we have the illusion that they are skilled readers, and then second, third, and fourth grade, but all of a sudden we have issues. Kids are not reading well. So I hope too that you have or are thinking about sound walls so that we can map from speech to print. Okay, Aaron.
So just going back to that idea, right, of the list of high frequency, and a different way to think about that list would be, this is actually from Readsters, and we have their article in the Wakelet. It's a fantastic way to kick off a PLC discussion about what's a word wall and a sound wall, and go through these words and decide which of these are irregularly spelled, which ones are wholly decodable, how do they fit into our scope and sequence. We should be teaching these right from the get-go in kindergarten, that short A, that the letter, right, the grapheme A represents the A sound, and why does it do that? Because there's a consonant after it. And so we have this VC construction, and all of those words are decodable once we've taught those consonant and vowel phonemes. And so let's utilize the most efficient part of our brain, which is decoding, sound by sound decoding, and not overtaxing students. It takes about 9 times the effort to memorize a word, like, on a flashcard with no analysis. So we don't want to overtax our students' brains. And so the work has already been done for you by Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter in that article. So you have the answer key, but if you want to set it up as an activity, it's a great conversation. So Pam walked you through this idea of phoneme-grapheme mapping, and so we're kind of going to go quickly through this because we're running out of time, but those words in that first grade list, right? Here's the word him. It's wholly decodable. And so she walked you through that example already, that we should be able to listen to that word, think about how many sounds it has, and then match the spellings to those sounds and be able to practice that embedded in text. Whereas a word like was, right, everyone should say was. The kids repeat that. It's in their phonological working memory. And then we think about how many sounds. W, z. Good. How do you spell w? That's regular, right? W. There's no memorization needed for that. The last 2 sounds, right? These 2 sounds are a little bit more difficult, right? Because their expected sound, at least at this point, for young students, is that a, right, would be spelled with an A, and now the A is representing a. And the same with the Z sound at this point. It gets a little bit more complicated, but for time's sake, we would show students that these are the unexpected spellings in this word. And so sound walls give us the ability to focus this attention on speech to print. And we're really not going to have time to get into this, but there are some fabulous trainings that are out there from the Reading League and other, our Patton colleague Don Durham has done a presentation on that. I think it's 2 hours long. It's fantastic. So taking a look at the difference, the contrast, and really talking through those valuable components. So we want to enable orthographic mapping. We want to reduce the numbers of words that were taught as whole words. There are some words that are pretty irregularly spelled, that will utilize in text, and so we need to teach those as priority words. And so Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter have pulled out these words, the, I, to, and will be decodable soon enough, but it's a nasal and it's blended and all those things. But in order to read connected text, we need a lot of these words here. But look at that, 10 versus 100. And so then we teach according to our scope and sequence. So what is best practice in teaching irregularly spelled words? So Pam's going to get into this a little bit. What do you think, Pam? Do we have time for our quick?
We have to 11, yes. We have to 11. I
10
think
minutes.
This is like a 2-minute video. I think it's an important one. David Kilpatrick, of course, is presenting simultaneous to us, so you can watch his recordings. He is fabulous, but he has specifically addressed this in his training. So we snipped this out. Sometimes too, if you go back and you start sharing some of the stuff, it's very dissonant at times. So it's good to have little resources that will help you and that are kind of brief. In 2 minutes here, Dr. Kilpatrick really addresses the flashcard scenario. So we are going to take the time to watch this because I think it's too important not to miss. But these are some questions on the left to think about as you watch. They were quick. Okay.
All right, I kind of highlighted this earlier, but some of the confusions involved. Word reading is not PAL. So when we do flashcards with kids, now flashcards I think are a great tool, but if we treat flashcards as paired associate learning, like this is the word said, you just got to learn it, said, because you can't, if you sound it out, it doesn't, you know what, much better way. When we learn about orthographic mapping, as I said earlier, we go from pronunciation to print to letter string. So let me just do a little diversion here and step off the whole thing and just walk away from all the research and theory and just talk about something practical you can use tomorrow with the kids, right? So you want to work with kids and you want to introduce an irregular word. Instead of just doing a flashcard and treating it like paired associate learning, which it's not, you say to the kids, okay, one of the words we're going to learn, one of the irregular words, you don't say sight words, you say one of the irregular words we're going to learn is the word said. Now, what's the first sound you hear in said? Said. You know, right? You're going to get some kids say S, and you say, no, I'm not talking about letter names, letter sounds. Good, very good. Okay, what's the last sound you hear in said? And they say, D. Very good. And then you say, okay, what do you hear in the middle of said, right? And they, great. Now, I'm glad some of you were responding. This was not a rhetorical question, but that's okay. So what you do is you say, now, let's see how that might be spelled. This is going to be a word I want you all to learn because we use it a lot. And you say, what letter do you think makes the S in said? What do you think? Yeah, that's right, S. See, now you're translating. You started with sounds. In a sense, you've plowed the field before you planted the seeds, right? You say the S, right? And then you say, what do you think would be the letter that goes with the D in said? What do you think? That's right, D, right? And what sound makes the E, right, that's right, but not in this case. This is one of those, fill in the blank, what do you call them? Tricky words, irregular words. What do you call them?
Words.
Heart? Oh, heart words, okay. Because you have to learn them by heart, is that it? Okay. Not because the kid has a coronary when he sees it. Okay. So you say, yeah, this is one of those heart words, or whatever your term is, and you say, this isn't E. This is very strange. Watch this. And you write AI. Now, let's say these are beginning first graders or something, right? AI. Now, you know, if kids have a more developed background and you're later on down the line, you're introducing a word like this in second or third grade, you might be able to show some other parallels. So in this case, you could say, you know how in the word paid, it's A, but not here, is it, right? But in this case, chances are they're going to get said would be the first AI word they're ever going to come across. And so you don't need to give them all the bad news at once. So you just don't worry about other AI words or what AI usually says. You don't have to do that. You can if you want to say it usually says A, but you know that's not important at that point. All
right. Did that do it?
Yeah, pretty much. What he says after that basically is, of course, if kids are getting practice, The difference is teaching. That's what I say. We're not giving kids words and asking to do paired associate learning and have a flashcard and just say the word. We begin with speech and move to print. That's basically what he was doing, is phoneme-grapheme mapping. So kids have something to anchor to, and it reduces the cognitive load. It begins with speech. It maps into the graphemes that align to those phonemes in the sequence that they do. It points out the unexpected part, reduces the cognitive load, and teaches words. All words are taught this way. We're just highlighting the hard part that's unexpected for students. So of course we want them to practice in many ways, but we begin with teaching, we begin with speech, and then move to print. That's the point that he's trying to make. And then of course, not only do students learn to read that word, but they learn to read many others. They begin to be able to orthographically map and spell, as Dr. Motes taught us this morning. This is a heart word routine. Again, you saw Dr. Kilpatrick kind of go through these steps. He said the word said. And of course, we want the kids to have the phonological word form in their mouth. We always want them repeating the word. He had a little bit of success with that with his audience. Then we match the sounds in sequence, and then we map them to the graphemes in the same sequence. And we do point out the heart part, or the part that they will need to remember. Then, of course, we can do them in many multi-sensory ways. They can spell them in the air and do them in fist bumps and many other ways as well. We want to have lots of practice of simultaneous spelling. And then you see, when do we get to the practice cards? Just go back one real quick.
Sorry.
Sorry, it's number 6. So the difference is many times kids are, number 6 is number 1, and number 1 through number 5 never happen, right? So we're just really looking at that sequence. Thank you. And on page 109, this is one of my favorite quotes in the Essentials book. The irony of the teaching practice of presenting irregular words to be learned as unanalyzed wholes is that exception words require more letter sound and phonemic analysis than regular words, not less. So we want to draw more attention to them than even those words that are regular. That's what Dave Kilpatrick is sharing with us in that quote. The really great reading does have some wonderful resources for teaching heart words. You saw a video earlier. Of course, the goal is to map, use their phonemic awareness and their sight word memory so that it's effortlessly retrieved, it's orthographically mapped. So we would encourage you to visit their website. They have some really nice resources there. And to the left here, you see an instructional routine. This is very much an I do, where you're modeling it for the first time. If we were doing the word said, we'll go to that next screen, I think, Aaron. Yeah, we would color in. We have 3 phonemes, d, right? And then we would say, what's our first sound? S. What letter spells that sound? S. What's our last sound? D. What letter spells that sound? D. What's our vowel sound? Eh. This is where we would expect to see an E, but in this word we see an AI. This is the part that you will have to remember by heart. And they have those resources on their webpage.
So wrapping up the session, how does your program teach sight words? Right, looking and analyzing and talking with your colleagues about what is an expectation from the materials that you have in front of you. Does your instruction differ between regular and irregular sight words? Are we utilizing what we know is effective with matching phonemes to graphemes? So for some final considerations, thinking about our learners, what sounds or spellings do those students know currently? It's only decodable to that student if they've learned the skill. And so what is your scope and sequence? What text are we asking students to read? Because those prompt actions, right, on the students' parts. So are there unexpected spellings in the words that students will encounter? And going through that repertoire, are they decodable now? Will they be decodable eventually? Do we have to introduce a word like on before we teach short O? No. So what are the sight words? So this is a sort of a quick write. We're running out of time here, but this would be your wrap up. So how would you describe sight words to parents? This is an application. It's often something that we sort of send home, and it's our parent connection. And how can we teach our parents to do what we know works best? So this is just a letter that we Googled and found what our sight words is pretty well done, except for one sentence I really wanted to change. Sight word is any word that's recognized automatically rather than sounded out. It helps children build fluency in word reading. And you heard Jack Fletcher talk about that, right? The lack of built up automatic words really influences students in the later years. But right, these words usually cannot be sounded out, so they need to be memorized. It's like, ooh, that one little sentence. Let's just change that to these words sometimes have unexpected spellings, and we're gonna give you a way to practice those. So we're gonna teach them first, then practice, just like Pam was talking about. So communicate these new updated ideas about how to teach sight words that are based in research. And Kilpatrick, again, there's a quote here that a familiar written word that is recognized instantly, automatically, and effortlessly without sounding out or guessing. It does not matter if the word is phonically regular or irregular. The point is that it's immediately recognized. And a sight vocabulary, right, refers to all the words a student knows. It's going to be different for every person, every student. But Jan Wazowitz would say that all words aspire to be a sight word. They all want to be instantly recognized, whether it's hippopotamus or symposium or equipped.
Okay. And for those of you who know me, you do know that I am kind of like the Padlet. I don't know if I'm the Padlet queen, but I certainly like them because they are a great way to curate resources aligned to certain topics and make it very easy and accessible. So in addition to our Wakelet that we share with you, we also have a Padlet that I created about high frequency words and the most effective way to use them. So you have two, I think, very nice resources, the Wakelet and the Padlet, to take with you to support your continued learning and maybe sharing with others as well. We would encourage you to do that.
So our learning intentions, we've talked about the terms and thinking about our definitions and a brief flyover of orthographic mapping. Certainly dig in if that was new for you today. And then where did this idea, right, of high frequency and sight words come from with Dolch and Fry, and how do we move beyond memorization of those words to build a sight vocabulary for our students? So we thank you very much. Here again is the Wakelet address, and I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat for you right now. But Wendy, I know we're over time, so if people need to use the restroom.
Thank you, everybody. We truly appreciate you attending. Wendy, do you have some closing information to share?
I surely do. Thank you so very much. I want to remind folks that not only is this Wakelet available, but in Schoology, all of these resources will be made available to you. You will have this recording within about 30 days. So that will enable you to go back through and relax and enjoy this yet again and grab all the details you may have missed.